Okay, we had to jump on here. We're doing a emergency pod for the unwritten rule because Mizzou got their defensive coordinator. So we're going to talk all about it. Corey Batoon, he is heading to Columbia to replace Blake Baker. We're going to dive into everything. Before we do that, quick word from the sponsor, BetOnline. Is playoff time, and the road to Vegas goes through San Francisco and Baltimore in the NFL. And BetOnline is your number one source for NFL playoff odds, stats, trends, and lines with everything from point spreads to hundreds of player performance props. So head to BetOnline today to be updated on all the action. BetOnline, the game starts here. And with that, the Unwritten Rule Emergency Pod Edition starts right now.
Marcel, where are you going with that disc? You are not putting that on again. Marcel, okay, if you press that button, you are in very, very big trouble.
Attention. Everybody stop what you're doing. It's time for The Unwritten Rule, a Mizzou sports podcast brought to you by the Believe Network, alongside Peyton Haverman and Kenny Van Doren. Here is your host, Jack Knowlton.
Welcome back to The Unwritten Rule. Today's once again Friday, January 26th. Hopefully you just watched our full episode that we normally put out on Fridays, but we had to hop on. We're doing an emergency pod because, of course, right after we record and publish and all that, not in the normal news cycle, but Mizzou has their defensive coordinator for next season, Corey Batoon from South Alabama. So we wanted to jump on and just get our quick kind of instant reactions. Obviously, I think we're going to learn more about him, about how his play style, all that stuff, and where Mizzou goes from here with him. But Peyton and Kenny, news came through. ESPN's Pete Thamel was the first to break it that Batoon is joining Mizzou as their DC after being in the same position at South Alabama. What were y'all's thoughts on hearing that? And Mizzou, after a longer than we thought, less informative than we thought search, didn't really know who the candidates kind of emerging were. They get their guy, I guess, in Batoon. What were y'all's kind of initial, maybe not quite their guy, but they got a guy in Batoon. What did you guys think of the hire, learning about it today?
Well, I didn't know too much about him other than he's from South Alabama, which meant he was under Kane Womack. So clearly he's a Kane Womack disciple. That's a very good thing, mind you. Kane Womack, of course, was the head coach at South Alabama for 2 seasons. He was hired away by Alabama to be their defensive coordinator. South Alabama won their first bowl game in program history. They went 10-2 last year. The defense is grayed out pretty good. I'm sure we'll get more into that. But just quick snap things just before even diving into the fit and everything. When you go 3 weeks, you probably didn't get your initial target. I think it's fair to say. I know DJ Durkin, now that it's kind of out there by now, DJ Durkin kind of seemed like the guy that Mizzou was targeting for a little while. That didn't materialize. But I don't think this is too bad of a pivot. Just diving into the numbers with them, the scheme will remain the same. They ran a 4-2-5 at South Alabama. That's what Blake Baker ran with Mizzou. I'm sure that including as long as DJ Smith stays aboard, you're probably looking at a pretty seamless transition here because sure there's terminology differences. I know, for example, Blake Baker called what Dalen Carnell played the star, but South Alabama called it the Husky. It's the same thing. It's just little things like that that'll probably need to be ironed out. But I crammed for this like I was studying for an exam last minute, but it seems like a decent enough hire. Obviously we're not going to know until Saturdays in the fall, but I don't think it's a negative hire for Mizzou by any stretch.
Yeah, why fix something that's not broken? That's what I've really just been thinking about when Peyton first sent me that he ran a similar defense that Blake Baker was using. You have a lot of guys returning, a lot of guys that were in that system that probably weren't playing as much, but practiced in it, saw it in game action, watched film about it. Why not bring in a defensive coordinator that has the same values on the defensive side of the ball? I'm interested to know what really played into that decision, what made Corey Batoon the guy for Drinkwitz when looking at a bunch of these candidates. And like Peyton said, he might have not been the first option. But when they get to that introductory press conference, because I'm a big guy, I'm a big fan of like football connections and coaching connections. There's no coaching connections that I know of right now between Corey and Eli Drinkwitz. They both coached at Arkansas State, but didn't overlap. Drinkwitz came in when Batoon was leaving, so I don't know how much familiarity they had with each other before the search began. I was even doing deeper research to see if they faced each other, and I didn't find stuff initially when I was first looking. But I do like the idea that, when you look at like the star position and having that the same thing as Dalen Carnell has just excelled at that. He even excelled at that when he wasn't the starter. When Martez Manuel held the reins to that in 2022, he came in and performed well as a backup. And he was one of the first guys to post about it, even before it was officially announced or officially reported that Corey Batoon was taking the job. He posted a bunch of eye emojis. He seemed pretty beat up after Blake Baker left, but he seems excited for what the defense holds with Corey Batoon.
That's a good point too, because he was a guy I know. I think Mizzou has a lot riding on next year in its defense and as a returner. So that's good that he seems excited. Yeah, I like Kenny. You went into his experience, and let's just like dive into that and some of the numbers. You're right; they didn't cross paths at Arkansas State, but this is a very experienced coach they're getting in Corey Batoon. He spent time, before. He was at South Alabama. He was at Florida Atlantic, Hawaii, Liberty. Was in different like administrative and staff roles at Ole Miss. He was in a bunch of FCS roles, including you said Arkansas State. It's he's been involved with a lot. Was also a one-time assistant at Central Missouri State, so he has coached in the state of Missouri. But yeah, a lot of different kind of areas that he's been in. He brings a lot of experience.
Yeah, and I wanted to point that out about the jobs he had at Ole Miss: assistant AD for player development, assistant AD for recruiting operations, and of course, every single coach is going to have their path on the recruiting trail. They're going to have states and cities that they just own. They know the high school coaches well. They know the area well. They know what types of players are being produced and developed at certain high schools. But when you have a guy who is just strictly in that role, I think that says a lot about what you're kind of getting from him off the field too. Blake Baker did a lot in the recruiting game as well. Someone who focused mainly on safeties because that was his position that he was coaching, but always been a linebacker guy. Even now, but when he's back at LSU, he is the linebackers coach. That's what I'm going to like to start to see once he's officially the coach. Starting to see a lot of these offers. We're in the offer season right now, visit season for a lot of juniors in that class of 2025. Maybe we see Corey's name thrown out a lot more, offering guys that he was interested in that probably couldn't have polled to South Alabama just because of the status of the program. And no knock on them. It's very hard to bring in a 4-star or 5-star to a program that's not at the Power 5 level. So there's probably a lot of guys in that area. And like you said, he's coached in a lot of states around the country. So everywhere. He probably knows a lot of high schools, a lot of districts well.
Yeah, you make a good point. Like, I think the administrative side of it will really help in terms of, Drinkwitz has embraced this kind of CEO role where he lets his guys go out and recruit. He gets involved with that as well. Seems like Batoon is a guy that fits that mold. Also, let me apologize to any Red Wolves fans listening. I think I called Arkansas an FCS school. They are not. Pride of the Sun Belt. I apologize. Batoon has coached at some, extent at the FCS level. But yeah, I mean, Peyton, diving into it, you touched on some of the numbers. I mean, this is a guy who last season at South Alabama, you mentioned the 10-win season, 2 years ago. Even last year, they went 7-6, but just to run through it, this year he was 26th in the country in scoring defense. South Alabama was. They gave up 21 points a game, 15th in the country in yards allowed per game, allowed around 315. South Alabama was 19th in rushing defense, 28th in passing defense, 23rd in red zone, and then 27th in third down defense. I mean, those numbers seem pretty good no matter what level you're at. For like some context too, that 21 points a game, that was 26th in the country. Mizzou was 25th in the country under Baker. So not far off as far as numbers go. What are y'all's thoughts on that? Like you mentioned, Paige, some of the scheme is gonna kind of stay the same. I think that's kind of a good match in terms of, he performed well at South Alabama. Seems like he can maintain it here at Mizzou.
Yeah, and also, I mean, Batoon was also a Broyles Award nominee in 2021, so that's obviously that can't hurt. But no, like you said, the numbers were very good, and a lot of that, it is important to stress. Kane Womack was, he's a defensive mastermind as well. And I'm not sure if Batoon, I couldn't find it anywhere if Batoon called the plays or not on defense at South Alabama. But I mean, it was going to be a risk either way. I mean, Batoon, he had jobs at Ole Miss, but he's never been a defensive play caller at the Power 5 level. So that's going to be a jump. I'm sure he'll have some bumps along the way, but that's just kind of the risk you take with a hire like this. But other stats, I mean, there's some nerd stats that like South Alabama's defense too. Nerd stats, I say with quotes. This comes from Parker Fleming, who puts out the world famous "Did we really get beat by that bad?" graph every week. South Alabama, they rank third in the Sun Belt and 24th nationally in EPA per play allowed. Those are very good numbers each. The Sun Belt was a very good conference this year. I remember when Kenny was on the beat, he'd talk a lot. Like to Baker actually spoke to the media a fair bit more. It felt like. I remember him saying like havoc was like the one thing that was a really big key to the defense. That is another thing that South Alabama did really well. According to an article about Womack from The Athletic, the Jaguars ranked 30th in FBS in havoc rate at 16.7%. Havoc rate is like tackles for loss, sacks, just negative plays for the offense. So that was the calling card of Blake Baker's defense. He blitzed the hell out of people. He wanted to really set the tone on defense, make big plays. That seems to be Batoon's MO as well, which I think is very good. And yeah, I think that this is a case of where the X's and O's kind of fit the Jimmies and Joes.
That's exactly. That was good.
That was good. That was good. Sorry, Ben. Kenny, go ahead.
That's exactly where I wanted to go. I was just thinking of the chaos, causing chaos and getting on the defense and limiting explosive plays. You know, how can we disrupt an offense? And last year, South Alabama did have those 22 turnovers, 13 interceptions, and 9 fumbles, 26th in the nation. And that was something that really stood out to me for a team that, you know, still had a very good defensive year. There were some guys you probably would have expected a little bit more from. I know Ennis Rakestraw only has 1 interception in his career, and it came in 2022 against Abilene Christian. And so a guy who's one of the best cornerbacks in Mizzou history, who's getting first-round draft buzz, didn't have the most interceptions. And so this guy bringing in a guy who could probably lead and try to help you, I mean, improve on the turnover category. I don't necessarily know how you kind of improve. Sometimes interceptions can just be straight up luck, tip passes. It's a pretty, I think it's becoming a more useless stat because there's just a lot more that affects a turnover these days than just a fumble or an interception when there could have been the receiver's fault or someone else's fault. But I think that's one of the big things. I'm glad Peyton brought that up. I was about to touch on it, is that the havoc and the chaos, that's what made that defense death row these last 2 years. And they had its ups and downs in 2023. Didn't have the best start that many were expecting, especially at the safety position, but they really turned it around at the end of the year and limited or held Ohio State to 3 points in the Cotton Bowl. That's something that you probably weren't expecting 2 years ago when that team was coming into the year.
Yeah, I think, Kenny, honestly, I think you nailed it there. Turnovers largely are a lot of luck. I mean, it's if a fumble bounces a certain way, if a ball is tipped at the line of scrimmage, it could lead to a pick. Turnovers are very luck-based, but havoc, chaos, kind of like what Kenny was saying, that's not luck-based. That's what you kind of control. Like, you can force more tackles for loss. You can't force a quarterback to throw right to your cornerback.
Yeah, good points. So it's sounding like a lot of this aligns, just like, you know, to summarize all of that. I think that's really positive if you're giving a glimpse at this, you know, just in the mere minutes and hours since discovering this hire, and we'll see, like you said, how it shakes out. I think one thing to point out too, I don't know if you guys mentioned this, but in addition to, you know, his various roles, pretty much everywhere that Batoon has gone, he's worked with the safeties. He did it most recently at South Alabama. He was also the safeties coach, and that obviously is what Blake Baker did as well. So you kind of can tick those two, you tick that box off as well if you think, you know, that's where he'll kind of slide into, in addition to being maybe the defensive play caller. I think that's a good note as well. You know, going forward now, I mean, Other thoughts on Batoon, but then, now where does Mizzou go from here? That was obviously the big question as of right now in the offseason was you got to get a defensive coordinator in, and then you move forward with kind of the next steps of building toward 2024. What are those next steps? What kind of happens now for the Tigers, and what should be their priority?
I remember a couple weeks ago, we were thinking maybe Mizzou goes on, probably doesn't have to go to what they would have paid Blake Baker to make a DC hire. I really doubt that Batoon's going to command 2-something million. So what that allows you to do maybe is just give some pay bumps to the rest of the staff. I mean, throw a little bit more money at DJ Smith, throw a little bit more money at Al Pogue, stuff like that, Kenny, I know we'll touch on, they do need a new edge coach. I figure that's probably what Kenny was going to touch on more, so I'll let him kind of cook on that. But I would just expect now you have your DC in place. His first goal is going to be talking to all the defensive players. A player like Dalen Carnell in particular, I mean, you think about it, this is like his fourth position coach at this point or something like that since he got to Mizzou. He was recruited under a different staff. Blake Baker was in the room. Steve Wilkes was in the room. Lots of different coaches, faces that have been coaching him. So that relationship, I think, will be important. But yeah, I think mainly now it's give your all-star coaching staff some pay raises, prevent more lateral moves and stuff like Drink says he wants to. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know where they go from there, though, with the edge rushing coach. There's no list, no reports about who to look out for. I'd like to see someone from the Power 5 level or a high group of 5 team that's shown success just because of where this edge position went last year coming into the year with not a lot of depth to it, losing guys to the transfer portal, to the draft, to eligibility running out. And you still saw a great turnaround from Kevin Peoples. Coincidentally, I talked with a recruit that received an offer from Kevin Peoples in LSU on Friday, Jesse Harold, who's an unrated strong side or weak side defensive end from the state of Florida, but he's really piling up all these Power 5 offers. You're going to get into that time where a lot of these unrated guys are stacking up offers and you're kind of confused why. It's just because they haven't gotten around to ranking them just yet because they just finished up their junior season. I asked him, though, because he did receive an offer from Mizzou on Thursday, and I was like, who offered you if Kevin Peoples isn't there? And he mentioned that it was David Blackwell, who's a senior analyst for Mizzou at the moment on the staff. I did some more research about him just because I had never heard of him. He's newer to the staff at the moment, but he was a defensive coordinator at Louisiana Tech, coached linebackers for a long time, from 1992 to 2021. He had a bunch of coaching experience, and it looks like he has that reach into Florida. Harold is from the Tampa Bay area, and Blackwell has coaching experience South Florida, Jacksonville State, even schools into the Carolinas and Clemson, East Carolina, Old Dominion going up a little bit more north. So he's been all around in the South, and I think that's where the pull is right now. So even without an edge coach at the moment, they're still finding guys that can recruit areas that they know well.
Yeah, the reach, I think it's good you mentioned Blackwell. That's definitely not a name I don't think many Mizzou fans knew. So someone kind of on the inside who knows a lot of places. It seems like Batoon's gonna widen their reach, in terms of who they can get in touch with where he's been. I think the overall kind of summary of him, yeah, he's very experienced. He's been all over the place. Seems like he does a lot of things very similar to how Blaker did them. And we saw how that paid off for Mizzou last year. So Corey Batoon, the new defensive coordinator, we'll see where Mizzou finishes or goes from here now with the rest of the headlines. Obviously, now we're in January. It's this in-between period in recruiting, this in-between period for transfers, all that stuff. You boys have any final thoughts on Batoon? He went to Long Beach State and played there. Go Beach. That was a fact I wanted to share. But yeah, any last things just before we look at this? We'll revisit, I think, on Monday for Monday's show if we learn any more details about him too.
There's no such thing as a football offseason. I'm starting to learn that a lot more. There's just no such thing as downtime in this sport.
Agree. But yeah, we'll see what kind of emerges in terms of what Batoon can do. Seems like it fits that CEO role. Drinkwitz always coaching, always recruiting. I think he's building something really, really special in 2024. So with that, hope everyone enjoyed. Just to want to do a quick kind of breakdown, instant reaction to Corey Batoon becoming the new defensive coordinator at Mizzou. Like and subscribe if you're watching on the YouTube. Comment some stuff. What do y'all think of the hire? This guy coming from South Alabama. Let us know. And with that, if you have not listened to Friday's full show, go listen to that. We'll be back on Monday. Thank you to BetOnline for sponsoring the show. We'll see you guys soon.